Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to the World Wanderers podcast. We're very excited that you're joining us today. Today we are diving into a topic that we've been living with for the past almost 2 years, which is flying with babies and toddlers. So Lou's visited 6 countries now, some big flights, some small flights. And so we want to dive into what it was like during her first 12 months. And we're going to kind of divide it into 2 sections, 6 months and 6 months, and talk about kind of the most important things we found, the tips that were valuable, the tips that weren't valuable, and everything around traveling with a baby in the first year of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is something that I actually found was quite hard to find information about or tips about online. And so I turned to my other parent friends who I knew had traveled with babies like the same age as Lou when we were first traveling with her to get tips, or, turned to social media to ask questions and get advice. And then I was just recently talking with a friend who has a son who I think is about 4 months old now, and they're about to take their first trip upcoming around the holiday season. And she was asking me all these questions. And I was like, I feel like we need to just create a resource on this. And I think the reason that there aren't a lot of resources is because you can't just say, like, here's tips for traveling with a child, or here's tips for traveling with a baby, because I feel like it changes so much depending on what phase your baby's in. So even 0 to 6 months and 6 to 12 months, as we're going to talk about, is a pretty big developmental age range. But I think between 0 and 6 months, like in general, our experience was that traveling with Lou through that age range was pretty similar. And then same with like the 6 to 12 months. And obviously it's just going to differ depending on when your child rolls and sits and starts walking and crawling, and when they start eating, and if they're still breastfeeding, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe we'll start by just giving kind of an overview of where we traveled with Lou and at what age, and then we'll dive into some more specific tips for the 0 to 6 month age and then the 6 to 12 month age.
Yeah, so Lou took her first flight at almost 5 months, which was actually a solo trip that you took with her to meet me in Montana. And then we flew back to Mexico when she was 6 months old. And then 9 months old, took another trip. 11 months kind of took her biggest trip at that point, which was down to Panama and then on to Colombia. And then at 14 months, we did our biggest trip yet, which was to Japan.
Yeah, and we have some resources with Japan. We did a lot of episodes kind of around that trip. So we do have an episode on preparing for jet lag and long haul flight and all that type of stuff. It'd been a long time at that point since we had done a flight like that. So I think we had a little bit of nerves and anxieties. And then also we'd obviously never done that with, a baby/toddler. But backing up a little bit, like you said, Ryan, our first flight with Lou was actually just her and I, and we were driving our car from Mexico up to Canada, and we decided that was a really, really long drive with a small child. She was, just about 5 months at that point. And so you left Austin a little earlier than us to drive from Austin to Bozeman solo, and then I flew with Lou from Austin to Bozeman on my own. So we kind of took solo trips. And this was where I really turned to my community because, I'd never flown with a baby before. And so, let's talk about this like 0 to 6 month range and kind of what we learned from that experience. Because then shortly after that, within a month, we turned around and flew back to Mexico, which is not a long haul flight by any means, but it's definitely like a full day of travel with a 6-month-old, which is kind of a lot.
Yeah, and so we kind of drew the line around 6 months for a few reasons. So before that, definitely not moving on their own, most likely to just only be breastfeeding or drinking milk, and maybe not even sitting in those early stages, and then doing a lot more sleeping as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that there's a lot of pros that come with this early stage because they do sleep a lot. So you don't really need to have activities for them. You don't need to have food for them unless you've started them on solids early. And so basically what you need is your like car seat stroller setup. If you don't have a stroller that works with your car seat, I think that this is really key for travel. We have the city jogger set up. And so we had the car seat that she actually used until I think just when we got back from Japan, like around 14 months. It was very clear that she was too big for it at that point. But it's basically the stroller, pops open and then the car seat is in it. And so that's what we traveled with for that. And it's pretty awesome because you can gate check that. So even though it's two pieces, you just pop it apart and you can gate check it, which means you get to take your stroller and car seat all the way through until you're right about to get on the plane. And I feel like this is super, super helpful for, checking in, going through security. If your baby's like falling asleep, waking up again, it's just super easy to have that. So I would definitely recommend having a setup like that. If you're nervous about gate checking, you can just check in with your airline. I think one of the things that was really helpful for me was just calling the airline. I think I was flying American for that trip. And so I just called them and said like, hey, I've never flown with an infant before. Can you just walk me through like what I can bring, what I'm allowed to have on the plane, what I need to pay for, all that type of stuff. And they just walked me through everything. And airlines in our experience are really gracious with children. We've never had an airline that wouldn't gate check our stroller, gate check our car seat. You get a diaper bag as an extra bag, so that doesn't have to count. And then we can talk about this in a little bit, but if you are, pumping or doing formula, there's also additional options for that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's an airline out there, but
yeah, check with your airline for sure. But I think we've flown a couple US ones, a couple Latin American ones, a couple Canadian ones, and it's always been the case. But yes, always check with your airline. And especially if you're flying a budget airline, I would just confirm, because I feel like budget airlines are not always as gracious with space allowances.
Yeah, Air Canada, surprisingly, was by far the best. Why is it helpful to have the car seat stroller setup versus just like a normal stroller?
Well, in the 0 and 6 month age, they're not big enough to actually just be in the normal stroller because they're not sitting independently. So you're going to either have a like car seat setup or you're going to have like a bassinet setup. I feel like the bassinet setup is just a little bit trickier with travel because then you still need the car seat. So having the car seat is really nice if you're going to be doing any car travel wherever you're coming from or wherever you're going. So it's so handy to just have the car seat, pop it into the car, pop it off, pop it on the stroller, take it into the airport, that type of thing. But I think the biggest thing is like 0 to 6 months, babies are too small to be in kind of your normal stroller that you would think of.
Got it. And so when it comes to the on the plane flying part with kind of a younger baby, what's kind of the important stuff there? I think the main fear people have is like baby screaming the whole time. What's kind of like the important tips you found?
Yeah, so maybe we can back up a little bit because I feel like there's a lot that kind of goes into like the pre actually getting on the flight. If you're doing a shorter flight and you can coordinate it around like a nap, obviously that's really helpful. It's hard to do that type of thing. So I think just doing your best, but trying to set yourself up for success with your child being able to like not be super tired, not be super cranky, being able to like kind of get as normal of the routine as possible. So I think that that's kind of key. And then I would say, getting to the airport nice and early is really helpful. We never used to be like super early people to the airport, but I think now that we've got Lou, we just try to get there extra early. And then we have Priority Pass through our American Express. And I feel like if we didn't, I'd definitely be looking into this because it gives lounge access. And I feel like that's been so helpful. I feel like it's really nice to have a quiet space. Airports are so overwhelming. They're so overstimulating. They're so noisy. And I feel like, getting on a plane where it's like busy and noisy with a really overstimulated baby can just be, a recipe for disaster. And so I think setting yourself up for success in that way, if you can be really helpful. And then, the great thing about 0 to 6 months is that you don't have to worry about packing snacks and you don't really have to worry about packing activities. So I think the biggest thing is just making sure that you're kind of all packed for anything that might happen. One of the tips to answer your question that I got early on is that a lot of babies will have blowouts on airplanes or kind of as you get up into the air, they might take a really big poop. And so just being prepared for that. So I'd say having a Ziploc bag with a diaper, wipes, and a change of outfit, really easily accessible. So I think the hard thing about 0 to 6 months is that like often they're not sitting independently, or, you know, they're kind of just a bit more blob-like. And so it's a little bit more sketchy to just like leave them sitting on the seat, especially if you're by yourself. So it's really nice to just have things easily accessible. So I would say making like a little, like, you know, obviously you have your diaper bag, you bring all that stuff, but make a little bag that you can just easily put in the pocket in front of you that's got whatever you need. So if it's like your AirPods, cell phone, book for once baby goes to sleep, and then, you know, if your baby takes a soother, definitely have that. And then I would say have a diaper or two, wipes, and at least one change of outfit. I would say probably bring 2 changes of outfit on the plane, maybe more if you're going on like a longer trip. I just feel like there's nothing worse than not having clothes for your kids, and maybe even bring something for you, because the baby is going to be on you. If they have a blowout on you or pee on you, then you're stuck in those clothes for the whole trip, but definitely something for them that's easily accessible. I would say change baby before you get on the plane, because the change tables are super small. Like I think I changed Lou on that first flight I took. She was not even 5 months old. I mean, she's like always been a healthy size, but I wouldn't say she's like huge. She was like hanging off of the thing. I was like, this is super sketchy. Definitely don't want to do this again. So I avoid at all costs having to change her on the plane. Of course, there's just times where you do have to, but I would change the baby before you get on the plane. And then one more thing I'll add is that I think having some sort of baby carrier can be really helpful. And this is really great. Like, you know, even for going through security, it can be really helpful. But as you're getting ready to go on the plane, maybe just pop the baby into the baby carrier so that you're hands-free as you like take your stroller and car seat apart. It makes it a lot easier. And then you can get on the plane, you can put your stuff up in the bin, you can put your stuff in the pocket, and then you can sit down and like unwrap the baby or pop them out, and then you're just seated. And I feel like that is really helpful. I did have a friend suggest that to me, and I didn't do that first flight. And I was like, oh, I could totally use another set of arms, basically.
Yeah. And when it came to going through security, when we had the bigger stroller, what happened with that?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on where you're going. The US is definitely the most intense with strollers. If you have a stroller that's too big to go through the security like thing that you would put your laptops and stuff through, the security, I don't know what, X-ray machine, yeah. They'll take it to the side and they'll swab it. Depending on what airport you're flying in and out of in the US, they do sometimes have like family lines or stroller lines or wheelchair lines, and then everyone's going through with devices. So it's just set up a little bit better, but you just have to watch your stuff, because they'll often like take your stroller, pass it through like the thing you walk through, and then they swab it for whatever, and you just got to wait for it. I think depending on the age of your baby, sometimes you can walk through, and probably the agent too, sometimes you can walk through with the baby in the carrier. I feel like my experience has been that they've wanted the baby like held out in front of me. And so, yeah, no soothers, no stuffed animals, anything like that. So I feel like for me, it's just worked to like get everything out in the tray, like put the laptop out, put your stuff out, then get the baby sorted, hold the baby, push the stroller, they'll take that, you walk through. And then it's just like hard putting your stuff back together, because it's like all your stuff comes through and you're still waiting for your stroller, and there's like nothing you can do with the baby. So that might be a good opportunity for like maybe you have your carrier out, see if they'll let you go through with the baby in the carrier. And if not, you've got the carrier to like put the baby back in so you're hands free. It's just different. Like if you're traveling with help, grandparents, etc., it makes it a lot easier. But I found like the 2 trips I've done solo, it's just like a lot when you've got a small child. Like it's been so much easier since Lou is able to stand, she can hold hands, she can walk on her own, you know, it just makes it like so much easier in a lot of ways for like security and stuff, versus when you've got a baby that literally like can't even sit.
Yeah. And then, so when it comes to being on the plane at this age, it seems like the biggest issue is the pressure in the baby's ears, and kind of when you're doing takeoff and landing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the advice that I was given and kind of what we've done that I feel like has worked really well is like, if the baby's asleep, obviously you don't need to wake them or anything. If they're awake, just let them do their thing, let them, play around or whatever. And then if you're breastfeeding, then as you're kind of getting onto the runway and getting ready to take off, you can latch baby onto your boobs so they start sucking. If they are not breastfeeding, have a bottle prepared for that. So if they are like formula fed, make sure you've got, or just drinking out of a bottle, make sure you've got a bottle ready for that kind of time, and try to wait so that they're like ready to and keen to eat for that time. Or if they're really not at a period of time where they want to eat, then I think having a soother or something they can suck on is really helpful. Obviously, it's challenging if your child doesn't take a soother, but I feel like that has always worked for us. So the first few flights, and I mean, even probably up until Japan, like our go-to is just like, we get in, we get settled, Lou plays a little bit, does her thing. As soon as we're kind of on the runway, put her on the boob, she nurses. And I mean, it's amazing because in those early days, she just nursed right to sleep and then slept a good chunk of the flight. So really handy. I could pop AirPods in, listen to a podcast, or, read my book, kind of do my thing. She doesn't just go to sleep with that type of thing now, which we'll talk about when we get to the second section. But I think that that's really key. The thing I found a little bit harder is descending, so going down, because the descent is a lot longer. Like takeoff is pretty quick and you hit altitude pretty quick, but going down is often like 30, 45 minutes. So depending on your baby, again, if your baby takes a soother, you could start with a soother. If they take milk, you could start with milk. But as you start feeling that descent, it's good to get them sucking on something in some way, and try to prevent them, crying as much as possible. I think thankfully we've never had any like colds or stuffy noses or anything like that while we've been traveling. But I think that that's where like the most pain can kind of be caused. So just be cautious about that if you're traveling with a child who's a little bit sick.
Yeah. And we've, especially on the bigger flights, ended up a lot of times coming home like later in the evening. So it seems like we've had Lou asleep on descent quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like too, I don't know. I feel like I remember when I was younger, it was always like needed to like chew gum or eat something or suck on something, to kind of help my ears. And I feel like just the quality of like the airplanes is just a lot better now. I feel like the pressure isn't as impactful. I mean, in saying that, it can be a lot for a child and little ears and stuff like that. So I think just supporting them to the best of your ability. And then just doing what you need to do. I think like if your child is, fussy once airplane or once seatbelt sign is off, just getting up and walking up and down the aisle with them. Again, this is where the carrier can be great. But I think just knowing your child and what they need and just trying to support them with kind of like their normal routine. You can also look into when your baby's under, what is it, like 22 pounds, I think. You can look into the bulkhead. I think it's like 10 kilos, like 22 pounds. You can look into getting the bassinets. I think you have to be in bulkhead seats.
Yeah. This is like a thing we totally didn't know about. But in the bulkhead seats, which are the seats that have like a divider in front of them, so like the ones typically at the, front of economy, right after first class, or typically on a bigger plane, there's probably a couple of them. But they can actually hang little bassinets there. So in the first 6 months, probably even a little bit longer, if you book one of those seats and request a bassinet, you can typically get one, which would be, make your life a way easier on those flights.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one other thing that you can do, especially if you were taking like a long haul flight, is that you can book a seat for your child and bring their car seat on, and you can strap them in. We haven't done this because we were taking shorter flights, and just with like the additional cost, we really didn't want to pay for a third seat if we didn't have to. But I think it's again like knowing your baby, seeing how you feel. If you're like super anxious and your kid sleeps well in the car seat, then maybe it's worth it for you. But that is something else to consider as an option, is that you could book a seat for them and then have them in the car seat.
Yeah, the only thing to be kind of certain of there is that when you're buying a ticket for someone under 2, sometimes if the plane is oversold, they can kick your baby out of a seat. So just something to be aware of as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then I just wanted to mention that if you are, I mean, maybe if you're even a mom who's like needing to pump or you are doing formula and stuff like that, a lot of securities and airports will allow you to go through security with formula or water that's designated for formula. And they'll definitely let you go through with pumped breast milk. You just need to have it in like a fridge or freezer bag. And then often they'll just like test it to just make sure that it's just breast milk. Again, I would say call your airline and just confirm what this looks like. But my understanding of this, and we have always just breastfed and then we went to solids. So this wasn't something we needed to do. But my understanding is that you do get that as an extra bag as well for most airlines. So they're really generous with space when it comes to babies and little ones, which is like really amazing. Like I know my friend was asking me like, oh, does his diaper bag count as like my personal item or my carry-on? And I was like, no, it doesn't. Like call the airline, of course, and confirm. But my experience with Canadian Airlines has been that it doesn't. So,
well, Canadian, Mexican, and America.
Yeah, our experience with all of them has been, they've never questioned us on having, a carry-on bag and a personal item on top of her diaper bag. In saying that, I feel like we have opted for checking bags as much as possible because it's a lot to have like a stroller car seat set up and then you've got your like diaper bag underneath it and then to have like all your luggage too, because you still have to like push and take care of the baby. And then if you're going to strap the baby to one of you, if there's two of you, it's like you still have like a backpack and a suitcase. So as much as possible, we try to check our suitcases and then we just each have a backpack on us and then lose stuff.
Yeah, I think pre-baby, we were much more likely to prioritize saving some money and maybe even, just doing things to make it kind of easier to get in and out of the airport. Now it's like, hey, we'll pay in a couple extra bucks to get these things checked and have the hands free. We're kind of maximizing comfort as opposed to saving money at all costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so do you feel like there's anything else we should add to actually flying?
Yeah, I think just honestly, maybe this isn't true yet, but I think looking back on it now, like those early days are some of the best days to fly with a baby because the baby's sleeping the whole time. The baby's super easy to carry, very small, not trying to like use your neighbor's laptop or rip up the security cards or do all those other things. So I feel like taking advantage of some of those early months to travel might be a good thing. And I think the other thing is there's all that fear there of, oh no, I don't want my like baby to cry. What are my neighbors and around the plane going to think? I think people in general are like very accommodating. We've had by far way more good experiences where like the person in the third seat is like, a grandma and like wants to hold the baby and all those types of things. So you can have really, really great experiences as well as, obviously babies crying and having a bad experience is an option. But I'd say maybe don't be so afraid of flying with a young kid.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's a great reminder because I definitely felt super anxious, especially flying solo with her for the first time at like 5 months. And it was like super easy, super smooth. She did great. I think the other thing too is like just try to prepare yourself as much as possible because babies really like feed off energy of parents. And I think if you're really wound up and stressed, then the baby's going to feel that way. I think if you can stay as relaxed as possible, then that's going to be super, super helpful.
100%. All right. So yeah, with kind of Lou getting older, obviously the bigger changes are when she's starting to eat food, she's starting to move around more, grab more stuff, eventually starting to crawl and walk. What were kind of like the bigger changes in terms of how we prepared to fly with her?
Yeah. So I think the two biggest changes are needing food, more snacks, and more activities. I think that that's the biggest thing. Like when she was little, like I remember she woke up on that very first plane ride and she played with the button on my jean jacket for like 30 minutes of the plane ride. Like that would not occupy Lou's attention for very long these days. Like she's just in a very different phase. So I think those are the biggest things that happen. I do feel like when I traveled with her at 9 months, she was not really in the like super snacky phase. She was still mostly drinking breast milk and just having like a little bit of food. So I think I just packed her maybe like a couple purees or whatever and made sure that I had some water. to and from on that flight. Versus as they get a little bit closer to the 12-month range, I feel like snacks are like a lot more key at that point, like having various snacks, spacing them out, having more activities, having more toys. They sleep less, they want to play more. They're probably going to be crawling at that point. They might be walking depending on your baby. Our baby was not walking at 12 months, but some babies definitely could be at that age. We still did for like the 9-month trip and even her like 11-month and 12-month trip, we were still using her like car seat stroller setup, and that continued to work well for us. I think the only challenge is that, what was it? Maybe around the like, when she started sitting around 6 months, we started like at home playing around with her being in the forward facing stroller. So kind of more of what you'd think of as a traditional stroller. We did that a little bit. And I think by the time we went to Colombia, she was like pretty over her like car seat stroller setup. Like she did not want to be in the car seat when she was getting pushed facing backwards. So I feel like it gets a little bit more challenging in that regard, because then you need to figure out what you're going to do for a car seat. If you're just going to have a regular stroller. So right around 12 months, we bought a travel specific stroller we brought the Yo-Yo by Baby Zen, which folds up super small. So it actually can go in the like overhead compartment, or it can get gate checked as well and go underneath, but it folds up super small, which is super handy. And then what we've done since then is either rented car seats with rental cars, or we've just like made sure we had car seats. Like for example, when we went back to Canada, both of our parents now have a car seat at their house. So we have a car seat that will last her till she's out of a car seat. So it gets like a little bit more complicated at that age, but I think between 6 and 12 months, you can still kind of roll with the car seat stroller setup. I would still say having a baby carrier is super helpful. Your baby might enjoy a little bit more like being in that setup. So you could even like check your stroller and car seat right when you check your luggage, and just use the baby carrier through the airport, especially if you have a baby that's busier, not sleeping as much. As soon as you like stop, they want to be crawling or walking. That can be a really great option to be hands-free and to have a little bit less stuff. I would say everything else is the same though, in terms of like diaper bag. I would still have extra outfits packed. I'd still have something really easily accessible. I think it's a little easier once they're a bit like less blobby and can kind of sit on their own and maybe move on their own a bit. I feel like I didn't feel as like uncomfortable just like leaving her in the seat so that I could get something from the overhead compartment, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think one thing that makes things a bit easier with having like food and water incorporated is that you do have those options for takeoff and landing. So instead of just relying on breast milk or bottles, you can give them a water bottle to suck on. You can give them, a puree to suck on. You can give them something to chew on, and that can really help their ears if they're not wanting to nurse and sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other things I'd add would be, as Lou's gotten a bit more mobile, we found that being kind of in the 3-person economy row where there's like someone random beside us, that's like almost the most stressful part of it, of like, what if we need to get up a bunch of times? And so a couple of times we've had on shorter like flights between here and Houston, here in Dallas, here in Mexico City, options on smaller planes that just have 2 seats on either side, which has been really cool when we can get those flights. Also because the planes just board and deboard so much quicker as well. So it could be worth looking at if you're like flying, to check what plane am I flying with. Maybe a smaller plane's an option. And then I realized the other thing we didn't mention was just kind of how the gate check of strollers or carriers works.
Yeah. So,
and especially with connections.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great point. So you always want to go and check with the airline, but in general, you're going to go get your stuff checked before they actually start the process of boarding people. So just like a few minutes before your boarding time starts, go up to the gate agent and just say like, I've got a stroller and car seat that I'm going to gate check. And then they'll scan it onto your like ticket or whatever. And then they'll actually put like the luggage tags on it. And then you can push it right through until it says like, leave your stuff here. And then it's always good to check like when it's going to come off. We've had some situations, just depending on if you're flying like internationally or to a different country, where things go to where the luggage is. So this is another huge pro for making sure you've got some sort of baby carrier with you, because if you end up with like all your bags plus a baby that's not mobile on their own, which they're not going to be likely between 0 and 12 months, it can be, and even then they're not going to be walking so well that you want them to walk like 10 minutes through an airport, because it's going to be so slow and take so long. So it's really good to have that just in case your stroller doesn't come up right away. But in general, we usually just ask like, will this come at our next destination right out? Do we wait for it? We usually double check with the flight attendants, but then you just get off the plane and you just wait for them to bring it up, and then you've got your stuff.
Yeah, so like right as you get off the plane by the ramp is typically where you leave it and typically where you pick it up. It seems like in Canada and the US, they're pretty solid on this. When we've flown one time into Mexico, we were waiting there, it never came. And then when we went to Panama, we weren't sure if it was going to be left. It ended up not being put out, right?
Yeah. And then we also had a time when I flew by myself to the US from Mexico, where it just went through with like the luggage. It went like all the way through. So I think domestically, you're almost always fine, but good to just confirm where your stuff's going to be. International, sometimes they just have strange rules about luggage. It just depends on like the airline and the rules of the place. So it is always good to check. But yeah, you always want to get your stuff checked before they start actually doing boarding. The like flight attendants and boarding agents will probably be a little annoyed if you're like, oh yeah, I'm just bringing this on. So always good to get that like pre-checked so you've got everything sorted out.
Yeah. And occasionally they'll let you check other items at like when you're first checking in as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had it where we have like a hiking carrier backpack for Lou that's a bit bigger. And we just asked like, hey, is this something we can gate check? And she was like, yeah, for sure. You can gate check it. Or if you don't need it, I can just like check it right now for free. And that was when we were doing check-in, and we were like, oh yeah, that's sweet. Like we've got her strollers, so we don't need this right now. And that was super helpful to offboard a little bit of luggage. We'd never traveled with that before, so we weren't actually sure if we'd have to pay for it or if they'd gate check it. So always just good to ask. I've found our experience has been people are very helpful and very kind with parents traveling with small children.
Yeah. What activities have you found to be particularly good for entertaining Lou on the plane?
Yeah. So I think that, obviously it's going to be different depending on your baby. But I think kind of in that 6 to 12 month range, and maybe even as she got a little bigger from that, because I feel like kind of 6 to 9 months, I had stuff for her, but she was very like just interested in the safety cards or looking out the windows, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the things that have worked really well have been like board books. So kind of the thicker books, and a lot of the ones that are kind of interactive. So they have things that she can touch or she can play with, or flaps that she can open. Those have always been a big hit with Lou. I have these, and anyone out there who follows like any parenting Instagram accounts will see these on Reels because they're super popular, but they're these like suctiony kind of like butterfly, bumblebee looking things. They suction to windows and then you can spin them. We've traveled with those, and Lou definitely likes those. They're like pretty good entertainment. Anything that can so like scarves that you can pull out of a box or a bag that they can kind of put on their head or they can touch or play with is really great. We also have these like plastic things that she plays with where they start really small and then she pulls them open. They make a fun noise, and she really likes those. So the thing I've looked for has been things that are small, things that are easily packable, things that are kind of dynamic that can keep her attention. But honestly, I feel like with Lou, I kind of we've always let like her kind of guide what she needs. And I feel like there's so much to look at and stuff that she's generally like, oh, let me like look out the window. Like they're loading the bags on and then the plane's moving. And then she plays with the safety card for a little bit. And then
plays with the barf bags.
Yeah, plays with the barf bags, like tries to climb up on the seat and touch the person's head in front of us. That's when it gets awkward, when they start doing things like that or kicking the seat and you're like, oh no. Or trying to grab the person beside you's cell phone or laptop or drink or whatever. But she's always been pretty entertained by that stuff. So I feel like we haven't needed like a ton of toys on planes. And then usually she plays for a little bit and then she usually sleeps at some point. And so.
Yeah. And as she's gotten older, we have given her some iPad time during the flights. Typically, like, we go through everything else and then it's like we need her to stop kicking the seat in front of us. So we let her watch the iPad for a while.
Yeah, a couple of the recommendations I got, and this would be for like more on the older side of like 12 kind of plus months, I think, or at least 10 plus months, is things like Play-Doh. Lou was definitely not ready for that until a couple months ago because she was constantly putting it in her mouth. But again, you know your baby best. So if your baby does not eat Play-Doh like ours did, then Play-Doh is amazing. And then also some sort of like, you can organize their snacks. You can get them like a little lunch kit or even like a fish tackle box. And you can set up like a bunch of variety of snacks. So you could put like berries and goldfish crackers or puffs or, you know, whatever you want your kid to eat, and just set it up so they get a little bit of each. And then you can kind of make like activities out of their snacks, because that can be really fun. So I feel like you can do like boarding, them kind of being entertained by that. Maybe you do a snack and then you do a book. Maybe they sleep a little bit and then they wake up and you can kind of do like another snack, another book, and that can pass like a good amount of time.
Yeah.
I think one thing I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on, because a lot of airlines do early boarding for families. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So there's kind of like two schools of thought with this, which one would be board as quick as you can, get set up. The problem is, especially on a bigger flight, bigger plane, it can be like 45 minutes from the time you start boarding to the time like everyone's fully boarded and you're ready to go. The other school of thought is try to board very last. And so we've talked to a few people who do. The concern nowadays is like it's sometimes hard to get carry-on bag space. And so what some people we've talked to have done, one parent boards kind of as soon as they can, puts their bag, takes the bags, deals with that. The other parent stays with the baby, hangs all the way back, and then boards kind of like basically at the end so that the baby has more time to kind of roam around. I feel like philosophically that makes a ton of sense to me, but we haven't done that at all. We basically just board as early as we can. Some airlines do still do like any families traveling with kids. It seems like some airlines don't say that out loud anymore, but still kind of mean it. And so we tend to
like
just
allow it.
We tend to just board with Lou kind of as soon as they're done boarding like the priority groups essentially, and just join whatever the first group of people is, even if we don't have that on our ticket. And the main reason for that is just we're traveling with, you know, extra stuff and want to be sure we can get it up into the overhead compartments and all that. So that's kind of what we've done. I could see us trying to do the like one parent boards earlier with all the bags, but
I feel like the only thing that sketches me out is that once you're on the plane, they won't let you off. So it's like if you're the parent that's back with the kid and you have like some sort of an emergency, it's like the other parent is like legally not allowed off the plane. I don't know. It just like sketches me out to a little bit to like split up. But I think in like theory, it makes a lot of sense to me. One person go get on, get the bag sorted. Other person just let the kid burn some energy, let them crawl around, let them run around a little bit more. And this is definitely more relevant with a bigger kid, right? Like the 6 to 12 month and 12 plus months age group. But yeah, I think when you're with like a small baby, I would board immediately. And I think we've only had 1 or 2 flights where I felt like we boarded pretty quick. And then I was like, okay, it's been like, we've gone through some activities already and we haven't even started like the actual process of getting this flight going, you know? And especially if you get a delay or something like that, then you can sit there forever. Awesome. Any other tips you want to mention? Anything else coming to mind? Any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think the biggest things are just like, don't be afraid to ask questions. And often, especially if you're doing international travel, it's worth like asking questions when you're checking in, basically everywhere you're going to make sure how things are going to work. We've tend to have found people being very like flexible and reasonable and helpful when it comes to baby stuff. So yeah, I think just get out there and hit the air, fly around. Also, I think it's interesting too, just the whole experience of becoming a parent and now traveling, just seeing the different ways countries handle it, different ways airlines handle it. Like when we were back in Canada, we noticed Air Canada had a family check-in. So there's like priority check-in if you're in first class, normal check-in, and there's like separate check-ins for families. So it's like being in first class. And so given that, like I only want to fly Air Canada when I'm in Canada flying with the baby now. So doing a bit of research there of like which airlines are the best to fly with. I know there's probably different countries will have ones that are better than others. So doing that research can be helpful and not just assuming it's always going to be the same.
Yeah, for sure. And just to clarify that, Air Canada's is families with kids under 6. So for smaller children. But yeah, that was so helpful for us because one of the things that's really hard, especially like getting into toddler land, is like toddlers don't want to just like sit still, and then you like let them out of their stroller, and then they just want to run around, and it's like not very helpful when you're like standing in a line waiting to check your bags or standing in security. It can just be a little bit stressful. So yeah, definitely would recommend that, and just looking that up because I'm sure that there's lots of other airlines who do things like that and accommodate for families. And I would just echo what you said, where I feel like Lou's such a fun age now. I'm still very excited to travel with her because she's just experiencing the world in this like bigger, deeper way. But I do feel like it seems really scary to travel with a small baby, but there's so many benefits to them not being mobile, them not needing food, them not really needing toys, them sleeping a lot. Like it is a really, really awesome time to travel. So I know it gets like a bad rap out there and people get really nervous and anxious for it, but would just love to encourage you guys to get out there and travel with your littles.
Awesome. Well, if you're interested in a little bit older age and then kind of everything else that goes into planning a trip with 1 and a couple month-year old, we have an episode in our Japan series about that. So if you look back in the feed, you'll see that. And then coming up, we'll be doing more travels with Lou. So we'll be continuing to talk about it and have additional episodes coming up as we gain more experience of traveling as a family.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone out there has any additional tips or anything they want to add to everything that we mentioned, feel free to reach out to us, info@theworldwanders.com. Otherwise, thanks so much for listening.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanders Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanders.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanders, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.